Hello, WiCCD members. My name is Maya Shukeri, and I am WiCCD's Education Committee Director. I'm happy to introduce our series, Finding Your Niche. In this series, we will interview female criminal defense lawyers who practice in a specific area within criminal law. The goal of our series is to highlight the work and accomplishments of female criminal defense lawyers, but it is also a way for us to introduce you to specialty areas within criminal law. We hope we can help you find your niche. Enjoy the series. Hello, Sid. How are you?
I'm well, Maya. How are you? It's lovely to see you.
Well, it's lovely to see you too. Thank you for taking the time. I know you had a cold that you're still dealing with, so thank you for taking the time to do this interview today, Sid.
It's a pleasure, and I'm honored to be interviewed. Thank you.
Well, it's my honor to have you as my guest because you are a very senior criminal defense lawyer, very experienced, but also you happen to be the president of WiCCD, or Women in Canadian Criminal Defense. And maybe let's start with that, Sid. If you can tell us a bit about WiCCD, what it is, how it came into existence, and what's the mandate or purpose of WiCCD?
Sure. So there was a group of us who wanted to develop a safe place for women and people who are gender fluid, if I can use that term. I'm not sure that's the right term, but non-binary maybe is the better term. We wanted to create a safe space that was supportive, where women were working together specifically to uplift and support other women. And that was the idea that created WiCCD. And we have done that by creating a listserv that is designed to be open, respectful. No questions are ever considered the wrong questions. There's never any pushback for people who ask questions. We're all there, very willing to help, very willing to pitch in, very willing to provide information to help other women. We also take positions on women's issues, and we've released a number of press release statements with respect to a variety of issues that affect women, not just women's issues, but issues that affect women. For example, we issued a statement on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for example. War is something that always impacts women negatively. And we felt it was important to speak out on that issue.
And as president of WiCCD, what is your vision for WiCCD?
I would really like to see WiCCD expanding and evolving to become more involved in litigation on issues in the criminal law that impact women, and perhaps not even just on the criminal law, but that impact women counsel in the practice of criminal law. I'd like to see us growing in membership. I'd like to see us being able to support more women and to provide a role model for young women in law school who are thinking about entering the criminal law, but who may have concerns about doing that based on things that they're hearing and seeing about how the legal practice in the criminal field is being conducted.
And maybe it's important to mention that the membership is free. Anyone who's
That's right.
Female,
That's right.
A criminal defense lawyer student, articling student, it's free to join. You just have to fill in a form, and it's a free membership. But
that's right. And the reason we did that intentionally, because we didn't want finances to be a barrier to women accessing our support system.
Especially right now, right? Because it is a very difficult time for criminal defense lawyers, at least in Canada. We're having problems with legal aid funding, and it's more with inflation, everything is more expensive. So it is very important to have.
Yeah, and post-COVID, a lot of people practicing criminal law really struggled through COVID because the courts were closed. The income possibilities for earning income were limited, and people really struggled. So, and WiCCD evolved in that era. So we wanted to make sure that there was an open door and people could come in whether they were struggling financially or not.
And still related to this topic about female criminal defense lawyers, Sid, because you've been practicing in criminal defense for longer than I have been practicing. And so you've been able to see the evolution of the role of the female criminal defense lawyer. I would like to hear your take on that. How do you see the role of female defense lawyers evolving? And is it getting better? Is there? Do you think we should do more? What is your perspective on this issue?
So let me start by saying I consider myself one of the OGs. So there was a legal aid study that was done. I think it was in maybe the late 90s, and it identified women who were practicing in the criminal law area and taking legal aid. And there were a small number of us. And then they did another follow-up study, and there was a even smaller number of the people who had been practicing in the previous study that were still practicing. Myself, Judy Rakai, Ruth Scotia, Mary Murphy. I think that those are the ones whose names I remember anyway. There was a small group of us. And it's disappointing to see women leaving the practice of criminal defense law. And I understand why it happens, because there's a lot of factors that push women out of the practice of criminal defense. I don't know that the role of women in criminal defense has changed or evolved so much as the circumstances of the environment in which they practice have evolved. I know that when I started, for example, it was pretty common for male crowns to try to intimidate me. I would go to trial and they would tell me, you're never going to win this case. Your client should plead guilty. There was a lot of pressure applied by those male counsel on me that I didn't get when the crowns were female. And I also began practicing in an era where there was still a lot of behavior from the bench that wouldn't be tolerated today. Attempts to intimidate female counsel, very blatant and hostile attempts to do that. And again, that would not be tolerated today. So I think those circumstances have evolved considerably, but what hasn't evolved are the circumstances that allow women to thrive in the practice of criminal defense law. Things like legal aid and the ability to have a stable, secure, and adequate source of income, the lack of good support for maternity, periods where you're out for children. If you're practicing with young children, I think that's very difficult because the children get sick or the children have other needs that have to be taken care of, and that takes away from the time that you can spend working on files and the time that you can spend interacting with clients and building relationships. Women also tend to be the ones that fall into the caretaker role for elderly parents. So even if you don't have children, you also then have the care for these other people in your family. So there still are factors that work against women. And that's, as I indicated earlier, that was a large part of the impetus for creating WiCCD, to try to be and lead at the front, be at the front of and lead to try to deal with some of these issues and make it possible for women to stay in the practice of criminal defense, because we see a lot of great women counsel who are really good at the role of a defense lawyer, but who for other reasons are required to leave and to go to the Crown's office or to leave the practice of criminal law altogether. That's something that we want to try to make better for women.
And I mean, WiCCD is certainly helping with that. I mean, we see a lot of our members are really very happy that we have this listserv that unites us, that keeps us always in, we kind of always are communicating with each other through the listserv, which is a very nice and beautiful thing to see. And of course,
I think the listserv is great because it's not just an Ontario listserv. It really is nationwide. We have members from one coast to the other. And if I'm not mistaken, we have members even in the Northwest Territories up north. So we
Yes.
are coast to coast to coast. And I have found the input of women from outside of the Ontario jurisdiction to actually be really illuminating. And I've learned a lot and benefited a lot from having a listserv that has them and their input on it.
That's true. And and it's also very nice that we have someone like you and like Anita who are really, if you can say the founders of WiCCD and who are really working really hard to keep this going. But so let's now shift a bit, Sid, and talk about you and your practice, because you have a very interesting criminal defense practice. It's a very hardcore one. It's really, you do back-to-back murder trials, and you're known for that, and which is really very impressive because, I mean, a murder trial is a different type of trial. It's long, it's complex, it's very draining at times. So, I mean, one thing I want to know from you is, how do you have this ability to do back-to-back murder trials, and does it not have an impact on your well-being? And don't you sometimes feel a bit depressed when you're always dealing with murder trials, because they're more complex than other criminal cases? So tell us a little bit more about your practice and your cases.
Sure. So, do I find it depressing? No.
Okay.
I don't find it depressing. The issues are complex, the stakes are high. For me, I would equate my role to a trauma surgeon. I see people at the worst period of their lives. They come in and they're in crisis, and it's my job to act as a guide and help them through the process and protect their rights as well as possible. So a surgeon would protect their health as much as possible. I go in to protect their rights as much as possible while they're going through this incredible crisis period in their life. For most people, a murder charge is the biggest crisis they will ever face in their life, because they lose contact with their families, they lose contact with their children, they could lose their liberty forever. The crisis doesn't get a lot. That's right. Employment. And for me, one of the biggest tragedies that I see for people who are charged with murder is I see a lot of people losing contact with their children. So that aspect of it is a pebble in a pond that causes ripples, right? A murder charge is a pebble that causes a lot of ripples that go in all directions and can have consequences far down the road, because you have children growing up basically without a parent. And we know from all the psychological research that is done what a significant impact that can have on the outcome of a person's life, right? And it's really significant. I've had clients whose parents have died while they've been in custody waiting for the outcome of their trial. And that is a traumatic event, to not be able to go to be with your parent while they're dying, or to be able to go to say goodbye. It's extraordinarily traumatizing, particularly when you're in the environment of jail. You've already got the stress of not knowing what the outcome is going to be for the rest of your life. And are you going to be free or not? Are you going to be living in a jail cell or not? But so that's traumatizing. You don't have your liberty. And then you get the trauma on top of that of losing a parent. That's really difficult for people. So I think, being able to be there and be a champion for that person and for their interests removes the depressing aspect of it, because you are trying to be the candle in the dark, right, in their life. So is it complex? Yes. Is it grueling? Boy, is it ever. And I'm not ashamed to say I've suffered multiple major burnouts during my career. And anyone who has an intense, stressful career is going to experience that. The key isn't to be afraid of that. the key is to accept that that's going to happen and have a plan to deal with it when it does.
And what is your plan?
So what I discovered through trial and error, there are two things that help me. One of them is horses.
Yes.
So I guess I was in, maybe I just turned 40, and I was trying different things to relieve my stress, my everyday stress, and didn't find anything that really worked. And I used to belong to the service that would email a quote to you every day. And I knew I was working myself to death, and I knew I had to find something. And I would always look at the quote every morning when I sat down to put on my shoes before I left the house. That was just my routine, because I thought that's a nice way to start the day, with a quote to send me out the door and on my way. So I sat down this one morning, and it was a quote. It said, it was Confucius, and it was something to the extent of, if you do not change where you are headed, you will end up where you are going. And I knew I was working myself to an early death, and that really impacted me. And so I sort of sat there stunned for a minute, and I was like, yeah, that really makes sense to me. And so I started thinking, what is the one thing I know that I would make time for in my life? And the answer was horses.
And
So
why horses?
Yeah, I started riding again. I had always loved horses as a kid. I used to, from the time I could walk, I would sneak away from the house and away from my, adult guardians. There was a horse farm across the major highway from my house. And I used to, with the dog, sneak across the road and go over and be with the horses from the time that I could walk. And I begged and begged and begged my mother to let me start riding, and my parents made accommodation for that. And I rode right up until the time that I had to go to university.
Yeah.
And then my mother rightly made me get rid of the horses, so I could focus on university and focus on building my career. And when I read that quote, it hit me. The one thing I know I'll make time for is horses. So the horses help me through the day-to-day stress. I make time every single day to go to the barn and ride. And even
in the winter.
Oh, yeah, because we ride inside.
Okay.
We ride in indoor riding arena. It's not warm in there,
Yeah.
but there's no snow.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then, even that's not enough, because when you're doing consecutive murder trials, the stress builds to a point where you get some burnout.
Yeah.
So what I discovered through traveling, because I also like to travel, for me, Italy cures my burnout. So I'll just take like 2-3 weeks off. I'll go over to Italy, and I generally like to go out into the countryside. I mean, I love Rome, but I really like the countryside in Italy. And I'll stay
in Tuscany.
I've been in Tuscany. Yeah, that's one of my favorite spots. In fact, there's a place I go in Tuscany where you can ride.
Perfect.
So
then
it's perfect for me. So I've gone there many times. I ride in the morning, and then I drive out the end of the driveway, and I think, which way do I want to turn today? And then I just go and I drive around the countryside for the day, and I stop in little towns and villages. For me, that cures my burnout. There's just, for me, something about Italy, something about the energy there, the energy of the people, the energy of the land, that I find really healing. And the food, of course, is amazing.
Yeah.
And being able to ride while you're there is amazing. It's like a double healing
bonus.
horses and countryside. So, I think not just doing consecutive murders is stressful, but this job is just stressful for everybody, right? People with murder charges are in crisis, but it doesn't take a murder charge to put your life in crisis. People with a domestic charge are in crisis. Homeless people with charges are in crisis.
Mental health.
Yeah.
Clients with mental health problems are also very challenging.
That's right. The mental health clients are extremely challenging, because their needs are so great. and the time that it takes to do a good job for them is so much more than you'll ever be paid for.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's not just myself that needs to find these tools of how to stay mentally and physically healthy. It's everybody who does this job, not just women, not just murder lawyers, every single person. And one of my pet projects is to try to do things to help encourage mental health in the profession, right? Like, and we should be kind to one another. You know,
Mental
if
health for lawyers, though, here, not
yeah,
about police.
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Like if somebody comes, if you're doing a trial and one of the participants has a family crisis or is sick, of course they shouldn't be required to continue that day. Just as a small example,
Yeah.
you know, of things that we can do for one another and to respect one another in the process. We're advocates, yes, but we're also human. And we have to give ourselves and the other participants in the process the ability to be human and to have those moments when you just need a break, right? So I encourage everybody to find the things that they need that are they can find a healthy way to deal with their stress, because there is stress in this job. And if you ignore the stress and just try to soldier on, it's eventually going to catch up with you. And the way that you can best advocate for your clients is to take care of yourself. That quote that goes around about you can't pour from an empty cup, that's true. So you really need to do whatever it is you need to do to keep your cup full so that you can go then and out into the world and help others in the best way possible.
That's really very good advice, Sid. And I mean, if you're able to find time every day to do horseback riding when you have a back-to-back murder trial practice, I think we can all make time, right, to for the things that we enjoy doing that give us a break from the challenges of the practice.
Yeah.
Just
Don't ever give up your free time. You've got to guard that. You've got to guard that with some degree of diligence and treat yourself like a client. Give yourself a time slot every day, and it's like you're the client in that time spot.
That's good advice.
Right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's an appointment with yourself.
Exactly.
For yourself.
Exactly. I know a woman who rode, one of my riding friends, and she always used to have, for her riding time, she used to ride in the morning, and her horse's name was, I think his name was Goose. It's a long time since I was at that barn. Anyway, she had an appointment every day in her diary at 11 o'clock with Dr. Goose. And she would tell her workplace, I am going to see my therapist, Dr. Goose, during this time. And that's how she protected her mental health, was by slotting a time slot for her therapist, Dr. Goose, at that time.
That's actually something that we should all implement, right? And make sure that we save those dates that are times for our own mental health. Sid, I'm not going to take more of your time, although I mean, I can talk with you forever. You're really very interesting and you know so much about so many things, but maybe just like some last words for new lawyers, especially new female defense lawyers who are getting into criminal law. Right now, as we mentioned, it's not a very easy time to become a criminal defense lawyer. But if maybe you have any words of encouragement that you can tell them as president of WiCCD, what would you say?
First, join WiCCD. You'll find it's a very supportive environment. It's a good place to ask questions. Don't have to be afraid to ask questions. It's also a source of referrals. I know that I have gone on the listserv when I've had matters that needed to be covered and have been able to find agents that way. I would rather give the referral work to other women wherever possible. So it's a good source of referrals. It's a great organization, so sign up. And the other thing that I would encourage women to do is to not give up and to believe in yourself. The most important thing I think that you can do as a criminal defense lawyer is to believe in yourself. And when others tell you that you're wrong, or that others tell you you should plead your client because you're never going to win this case, trust yourself, trust your gut. If you think that you can win the case and the client gives you instructions to go ahead, then you go in there and you be yourself and you fight hard. Believe in yourself. And your confidence will come from that. Your victories will come from that. You have to be the best you that you can be. You can't be somebody else. Don't try to imitate other people. You be the best you can be. You go in there and you believe in yourself and you do what you think is right.
That's very good advice. Thank you so much, Sid, for your time. I hope you get better also soon. And it was really very nice to chat with you. Thank you for taking the time.
Maya, it's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you for allowing me to do this. I've really enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful for the people who
I'm
see it.
sure it will be. Thank you so much, Sid.
All right, take care.